two men accused of spying for China.
It was a spy trial that should have been a big deal.
It's a botched spy prosecution that's ignited a political blame game.
There's a lot of finger-pointing over who's to blame.
The Prime Minister wants to suck up to Beijing.
So all the focus needs to be on the policy of the Tory government.
So what's the case all about? Why did it fall apart? And why is the government so nervous to talk about China?
The UK is under fire for getting too cozy with China. It's March 2023. MI5 found something suspicious about two British men. Reports revealed that MI5 had been investigating them for passing sensitive parliamentary information to China. It confirmed they would have to face severe punishment. At least everyone was expecting so, because what Britain did was the most unexpected move. They dropped the charges on September 15th, just a month before the trial was due to begin. Now, don't be surprised. This is just a tiny part of the scary things that China is doing in the UK. As always, China won't like getting exposed like this, and we'll try to suppress the video in the algorithm. Except you can help us by clicking on the like button. Thank you. October 2023. The head of MI5 gave a stark warning saying that 20,000 Britons had been approached by Chinese agents on LinkedIn. The goal was clear and destructive: to steal the UK's industrial and technological secrets. China's success rate is not so surprisingly massive. MI5 chief said that around 10,000 UK businesses are now considered at risk. The reason I said it's not surprising is because enemies outside your fortress could be identified easily, but the ones inside your home, they're hard to identify. Two young Britons stand at the center of a storm that feels like it's straight out of a spy novel. Christopher Cash, a parliamentary researcher known for his work on Chinese policy, and his friend, Christopher Barry, were accused of acting as spies for Beijing. Both men have fiercely denied the allegations, but the words didn't seem to match their actions. Prosecutors alleged that between December 28, 2021 and February 3, 2023, the two men had, for a purpose prejudicial to the safety or interests of the state, obtained, collected, recorded, published, or communicated information which was calculated to be, might be, or were intended to be, directly or indirectly, useful to an enemy. But it seemed like the real enemy was not China. Their trial, once set to begin this October, was abruptly halted when the Crown Prosecution Services dropped the case, just weeks before it was due to start. It offered almost no explanation for the shocking decision. What could have been the perfect moment to expose a sprawling Chinese spy network, the opportunity slipped away. To understand why the prosecutors played this move, we need to rewind to where it all began. One of the people, Christopher Cash, is the son of a GP. Cash enjoyed a privileged upbringing, attending the £5,000 a term George Watson's College in Edinburgh, one of the UK's most prestigious private schools. Cash then went on to study history at the University of St Andrews. Everything seemed fine, until this. Because after his undergraduate studies, he spent 2 years teaching English in Hongqiao, near Shanghai, under a British Council scheme, and then pursued an MSc degree in China from the Lao China Institute at King's College London. With his deep knowledge of Chinese politics, thanks to his master's studies, he quickly became an expert on Beijing's inner workings. But here's where it gets really interesting. He didn't just work anywhere. Cash co-founded the China Research Group, a think tank dedicated to scrutinizing China's influence and policies, and served as its director. Mind you, this was not just another think tank. This group, established in 2020 by conservative MPs, including Tom Tugendhat, operated at the very heart of UK politics. Cash wasn't just a parliamentary researcher here. He was inside the corridors of power, working directly with MPs, focused on Britain's response to China's rising global influence. After Tugendhat's promotion, Alicia Kearns took over, not only leading the CRG, but also chairing the Foreign Affairs Select Committee. Kearns was a nightmare for China. By November of that same year, Kearns was leading a delegation of MPs to Taiwan, a move that drew heavy criticism from Beijing, which considers Taiwan a part of its territory. And all the while, Christopher Cash was right at the center of it all. Cash wasn't just any aide. He was young, fluent in Mandarin, and according to Kearns, very capable. She even helped him get a parliamentary pass, which requires background checks, so he could be more accessible to her team. Normally, he worked out of a serviced office in Waterloo. Through his position with Kearns, Cash gained unusual access to parliamentary circles and senior policymakers, including close proximity to Tugendhat himself. Kearns described him as someone who loved China, but was always heavily critical of the Communist Party. It seems crazy. It's like I'm saying I'm vegan, but I love chicken. In fact, Cash was deeply involved in pushing for national security provisions to stop Chinese companies from undercutting British rivals, and even helped expose the presence of covert Chinese police stations in the UK. By all accounts, Kern said he was within her trusted circle of staff, but she was confident he never had access to anything classified, since she wasn't part of the government. Still, she admitted he had a strong grasp on how Parliament really works, what MPs read, how they think, and how they operate. Until now, Cash seems to be the villain of the story, except there was someone who was helping him secretly. Their past could give all the answers authorities wanted, just because of a no-brain reason. His friend, Christopher Berry, a language teacher with strong academic ties to China, was also accused of helping him gather sensitive information. Berry had been working in China since 2015, holding various teaching positions, and the two had known each other for several years. Both were teachers in Huangshao, China between 2017 and 2019. Both Cash and Berry were charged under the UK's 1911 Official Secrets Act. Nick Price, head of the CPS Special Crime and Counterterrorism Division, described the case as both serious and complex, requiring close coordination between intelligence agencies and prosecutors to fully assess the depth of the alleged espionage. Because of its sensitivity, for months, their March 2023 arrests were kept secret, almost unheard of in Westminster, where news spreads fast. It wasn't until September of 2023 that the press caught wind of it. But details were scarce because the case was still active. Very soon, the shocking secrets started coming into the public. In April of 2024, the Crown Prosecution Service laid out its case. The CPS alleged that there was a direct chain of communication from Cash all the way to Beijing's Politburo. They claimed a person believed to be a Chinese intelligence agent had commissioned at least 34 reports from Berry on topics of political interest. Some of those topics were apparently suggested by Berry himself, which were considered harmful to UK national security, and according to prosecutors, Berry then sourced some of that information from Cash. But Cash never had the chance to defend himself in court. His allies insist he was never paid, coerced, or blackmailed, and that any information he shared with Berry was open-source material, general political analysis, or simply Westminster gossip. Berry's legal team, meanwhile, prepared to argue that he believed the 34 reports were written for a corporate client in China, looking to expand business in the UK. His lawyer, John Armstrong, described the reports as a confection of open-source material from various sources, with Berry merely offering his thoughts on contemporary politics. Any input from Cash, Armstrong stressed, was unclassified Westminster gossip, far from the espionage narrative painted by prosecutors. However, the CPS claimed that most of the information provided by Cash was solicited by Berry, but over time, Cash allegedly shared unsolicited, off-the-record information as well. According to prosecutors, the so-called Chinese agent at the center of this case passed on politically sensitive information obtained from Cash via Berry to a senior member of the Chinese Communist Party, even a Politburo member. This Chinese recipient was not an ordinary person. The power he holds is unimaginable. The Guardian reported that British prosecutors suspected Kai Chi, one of the most powerful figures in China, may have been the ultimate recipient of intelligence allegedly linked from Westminster. For context, Kai Chi is the fifth-ranking member of the 7-man standing committee of the CCP Politburo, the most powerful political body in China, headed by Xi Jinping himself. Kai isn't just any official. He's a Xi loyalist, a former party secretary of Beijing, and now director of the CCP's general office, essentially Xi's chief of staff. So, if true, this would mean that information from inside the UK Parliament somehow reached the top tier of China's leadership. But here's the thing, a lot of experts are skeptical. The idea that a Politburo member at Kai's level would personally receive low-level Westminster gossip from two young researchers with no access to classified material doesn't exactly add up. Professor Kerry Brown, director of the Lao China Institute at King's College London, said it is very unlikely that someone like Kai would have direct contact with a foreigner, even in an intelligence-gathering context. He pointed out that members of the Politburo really aren't accessible, especially under Xi Jinping's highly centralized system. In his words, they don't really have any liberty to do anything too entrepreneurial. However, the CPS has said this was prejudicial to the safety or interests of the UK, since it was directly or indirectly useful to the Chinese state. Amid all this chaos, China hit back hard, calling the entire case entirely fabricated and malicious slander. China had to reply to this controversy someday or another, because this was a different case than others. For the past 2 years, the case against Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry had dominated Western media, hailed as one of the most high-profile spying cases involving China. The allegations were serious, the evidence appeared pretty damning, and the story captivated audiences around the world. But Britain's Crown Prosecution Services, the CPS, dropped the charges on September 15th, just a month before the trial was due to begin. The official reason? The case no longer met the evidential threshold. Suddenly, a story that had gripped headlines for years vanished from the courts. Alicia Kearns, a key witness and Conservative MP, had no warning signs that the case was about to collapse. Just a week earlier, officers from the Met's SO15, that's the unit that handles spies and terrorism cases, had arranged a simple court familiarization visit for her. Then suddenly, boom, the whole case fell apart. Common Speaker Lindsay Hoyle voiced his outrage, warning that Parliament itself might not be properly protected from foreign interference. Meanwhile, the government and opposition are locked into a bitter blame game, each accusing the other of failing to recognize China as a national security threat. As calls grow to overhaul the Official Secrets Act, one question looms larger than any other. Kearns got frustrated. She said, "Something is very amiss. If the Crown Prosecution Service has the evidence, why not put it in front of a jury and test it?" According to the CPS, the case was kept under continuous review. Prosecutors claimed that the evidential standard was no longer met, even though that same standard applied when the two men were originally charged earlier. And remember, that prosecution had the green light from the Attorney General at the time, Victoria Prentice. According to reports, the entire case collapsed because government officials refused to legally define China as an enemy. And under the Official Secrets Act of 1911, that definition is absolutely crucial. You can't prosecute someone for helping an enemy unless the government officially calls that country an enemy. So without that classification, the case wouldn't stand, and it just imploded. Downing Street called it extremely disappointing that these individuals will not face trial. The Secretary-Minister, Dan Jarvis, echoed that sentiment in Parliament, though he said the decision to stop the case was an independent one made by prosecutors. Luke de Pulford of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China said that if the case had gone ahead, the defense would have likely tried to litigate the question as to whether China was an enemy. That definition was crucial under the 1911 Official Secrets Act, the very law under which the case against Cash and Berry was filed. Under that outdated framework, prosecutors would have to formally label China as an enemy state to move forward with the charges. But here's the twist. Under the UK's newer National Security Act of 2023, the government no longer needs to declare a country an enemy to prosecute someone for espionage, hacking, or other hostile acts. However, because this case was registered under the old law, officials were still bound by its strict definitions, and according to media reports, that technicality may have made it legally impossible to pursue China directly. But defining China as an enemy would have gone far beyond usual diplomatic language and risked angering Beijing. The UK's dilemma runs far deeper than politics. It's rooted in economics. Britain's economy has become heavily dependent on China, in particular through its booming service sector. In fact, UK service exports to China surged by 12.1%, reaching £13.2 billion, with services now accounting for nearly half of all British exports to China, the highest proportion in modern history. And let's face it, China is the undisputed king of global manufacturing, a reality that Britain's market can't easily ignore. Perhaps that's why, despite lots of allegations, China is still planning to construct a big, new Chinese diplomatic complex in the UK, stretching across 20,000 square meters of prime London real estate, right near the Tower of London. The £255 million site has a long and symbolic history. Once home to a medieval abbey, later the birthplace of British coin manufacturing, and now owned by the Chinese government. Local residents, human rights campaigners, and even backbench MPs protested fiercely against the deal, warning that the project could serve as more than just an embassy. Many strategic analysts now believe the complex could house Chinese intelligence operatives, operating under diplomatic cover. Amid growing pressure and public scrutiny, the UK government has quietly delayed final approval for the project, a move that speaks volumes about the unease now gripping Westminster. Even before Cash and Berry, Britain's own Strategic Defence Review had already warned that China posed a sophisticated and persistent challenge to the UK, language that feels even more significant in light of what's happened since. Many experts believe the UK's China policy has always been a balancing act, trying to stand firm on Beijing's authoritarianism while still keeping the door open for trade and environmental cooperation. Because of that, both Labour and the Conservatives have been careful in how they describe China. In the 2021 Integrated Review, China was called a systemic competitor. By 2023, that wording had escalated to an epoch-defining and systematic challenge. And Labour? Well, in its national security strategy, strategy release, it went with the phrase geostrategic challenge. Subtle differences, but each one reflects on how political leaders are trying to walk a tightrope between diplomacy and defense. While politicians are cautious with their wording, the intelligence world isn't mincing words. They see China as an active, ongoing threat. Back in November of 2021, the former MI6 chief, Richard Moore, called China the single greatest priority for Britain's Foreign Intelligence Service. Then in October of 2023, Ken McCallum, head of the MI5, gave a stark warning, saying that 20,000 Britons had been approached by Chinese agents on LinkedIn, trying to steal industrial and technological secrets. He said industrial espionage was happening at real scale, and MI5 was detecting massive amounts of covert activity from China in particular. And the targeted sectors aren't some normal businesses. They are artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and synthetic biology, the technologies that are shaping the future. He warned that week by week, our teams detect massive amounts of covert activity by the likes of China, but also Russia and Iran. And it's not just about military or government data anymore. Chinese intelligence is increasingly going after startups, university research, and small tech companies that might not even think national security really applies to them. One of the main attack methods? Fake recruiters on LinkedIn. According to McCallum, Chinese operatives are pretending to be headhunters, reaching out to professionals online to build trust and then extract sensitive information. He said MI5 has tracked over 20,000 such approaches, double the number from just a few years ago. Globally, the concern about Chinese industrial espionage has exploded over the past decade, led by the United States, which sees itself locked in a long-term struggle with Beijing for economic and technological dominance. At the same event, FBI Director Christopher Wray didn't mince words. He called the Chinese Communist Party the #1 threat to innovation, accusing Beijing of making economic espionage and IP theft a central part of its national strategy. Wray said he's running over 2,000 active investigations tied to Chinese activities, and the FBI is opening a new case roughly every 12 hours. McCallum didn't give a similar number for MI5, but confirmed that the agency's China caseload has jumped 7-fold in the past 4 years. MI5 said it was tracking 20 cases involving Chinese companies trying to evade British regulations using shell structures, front firms, and hidden investments to secretly access sensitive UK technology and university research. In at least 2 cases, Chinese companies reportedly tried to find legal loopholes to tap into the intellectual property of British firms, and in another, one acquired stolen research data from a top UK university. McCallum, Wray, and their counterparts said they're seeing the same playbook everywhere. Cyber infiltration, industrial espionage, and strategic theft, all aimed at gaining an edge in global innovation. Intelligence agencies are increasingly alarmed by state-sponsored hacking, covert recruitment, and political influence operations linked to Beijing. And this pattern isn't limited to the UK. All across Europe, Beijing has been accused of subtle infiltration tactics, often targeting right-wing or nationalist political movements to sway policy and gain access to sensitive information. In Germany, for example, authorities arrested Jian Ji, who was accused of passing information from EU legislative discussions to Chinese intelligence. Jian had ties to Maximilian Krah, a leading figure in the far-right Alternative for Germany (AfD) party, a party already criticized for being sympathetic to both China and Russia. As one German MP, Konstantin Kulla, in the Free Democrats put it, the existence of a right-wing extremist party that eagerly spreads narratives from China and Russia makes Germany a prime target for foreign spies. Elsewhere, Belgium has faced similar concerns. Prime Minister Alexander De Croo warned that China was sometimes very hostile after revelations that Frank Krelleman, a member of the far-right Vlaams Belang party, had allegedly been recruited by Chinese intelligence to influence EU debate on issues like Hong Kong and the Uyghurs. Investigations by the Financial Times and others revealed that Daniel Wu, an officer in the Chinese Ministry of State Security, had tasked Krelleman with persuading European politicians to publicly accuse the UK and the US of undermining Europe's energy security. Why China appears to be targeting certain right-wing figures across Europe remains unclear. Some analysts suggest that Beijing sees opportunity in nationalist movements that are often skeptical of Western alliances like NATO or the EU, creating openings for influence. What is certain is that the mounting espionage threat has unsettled governments across Western Europe, and that is why questions are mounting over the sudden collapse of the case against Christopher Cash and Christopher Berry, accused of spying for Beijing. Even the former chief of the Secret Intelligence Service admitted he is unsure why the prosecution was dropped, fueling suspicion across Westminster. The controversy deepened amid claims that the Prime Minister's team had access to multiple documents showing that China posed a serious national security threat, but allegedly chose not to share them with the Crown Prosecution Service before the case was abruptly closed. And the fallout isn't just political, it's diplomatic. The The collapse of the case has put the UK's intelligence relationship with the United States at risk, with Washington reportedly unhappy with how sensitive information and security assessments were handled. White House sources told The Times that President Donald Trump is increasingly concerned about the reliability of the UK after the espionage charges were dropped. A senior US official warned, "The United States has been warning allies about the Chinese threat to our combined national security since President Trump first came into office in 2017. The US government exercises extreme caution in sharing information with foreign governments subject to adversarial coercion and influence. We are especially careful in jurisdictions where our adversaries can act with impunity." That concern runs deep. Back in 2019, the United States banned Huawei, one of China's largest tech and telecommunications companies, citing national security risks. US intelligence agencies warned that the Chinese government could use Huawei to spy, pointing to broad and ambiguous Chinese intelligence laws that could compel the company to hand over sensitive data to Beijing. And it wasn't just the US sounding the alarm. Australia, and later several European nations, joined the pushback, but Beijing didn't take it lightly. To protect Huawei, China's ambassador to Germany warned that German car manufacturers would face economic consequences if Berlin reduced Huawei's role in its 5G network. A year later, Beijing's envoy to Sweden made similar threats, after Stockholm decided to ban Huawei from its telecommunications infrastructure. And just as the China spy case controversy was rocking the UK Parliament and dominating Western media headlines, a new twist erupted across the Atlantic. The United States announced the arrest of another alleged Chinese spy on American soil, a man whose name shocked Washington: Ashley Tellis, a prominent US government advisor and expert on India-US relations. He was arrested and charged with unlawfully retaining national defense information and allegedly meeting with Chinese officials. According to an affidavit filed in the Eastern District Court of Virginia, Tellis was serving as an unpaid senior advisor for the U.S. Department of State, while also working as a contractor at the Office of Net Assessment, ONA, a secretive internal think tank within the Pentagon that advises the Department of Defense on long-term strategy. The affidavit alleges that Tellis met with Chinese officials multiple times in recent years. In one particularly suspicious meeting, in September of 2022, he was seen arriving at a restaurant in Fairfax, Virginia, carrying a manila envelope, an envelope that, according to investigators, he did not have when he left 2 hours later. The timing of his arrest, just as the UK dropped its own Chinese spy case, has raised eyebrows in both Washington and London, deepening fears of a coordinated espionage network operating across the West. For the United States, the concern couldn't have come at a worse time. The war between Russia and Ukraine shows no signs of ending, despite repeated diplomatic efforts from Washington and its European allies. Meanwhile, energy insecurity and economic strain are putting enormous pressure on Europe's survival and unity. And now, intelligence officials are warning of a nightmare scenario. If critical information were to leak from the United States, the UK, or other European powers through a Chinese spy network, or if Beijing were to gain access to advanced military or technology data, it could mirror the historic breach of the Manhattan Project, when Soviet spies infiltrated the US, the UK, and Canadian nuclear programs during World War II. If history were to repeat itself, the consequences for Europe and the United States could be catastrophic, not just for national security, but for the global balance of power itself. And that's why, more than ever before, the UK and its Western allies must make a choice, a bold one, to put national security above trade, economy, and convenience. Because in a world where influence is currency and information is power, hesitation could cost far more than money. It could cost the future of the free world. Thanks for watching.